What would you do if an entire room laughed at your dream? Imagine walking into a pilot interview at just 17 years old, and before you even speak, the crew assumes you're there to clean the floors. That's exactly what happened to Maya. The instructors mocked her, dismissed her application, and told her she wasn't qualified to become a pilot. But what they didn't know was that this quiet teenager had spent years studying aviation, mastering flight simulators, and preparing for this exact moment. Just when she was about to walk out with her dream crushed, the door suddenly opened. A powerful billionaire stepped into the room, and everything changed in seconds. The crew froze when they discovered the truth. The girl they had just humiliated was his daughter. But instead of giving her special treatment, what he did next left the entire room speechless and taught everyone a lesson they would never forget. Airplane. The room went silent the second she walked in. 17-year-old Maya stood at the entrance of the prestigious Harbor Aviation Training Center, clutching her application folder tightly against her chest. The building itself looked intimidating: glass walls, polished floors, and large photos of pilots and aircraft covering the walls. For most people, it was just another training facility. But for Maya, it was the place where her lifelong dream could finally begin. Her eyes were bright with determination, but the moment the crew members behind the front desk looked up and noticed her, their expressions slowly shifted. At first, they looked confused. Then came the subtle smirks and raised eyebrows. One instructor leaned toward another and whispered something that made them both chuckle. Finally, a middle-aged instructor with a badge that read Captain Reynolds looked directly at her and asked casually, "You're here for the cleaning job, right?" A few people nearby laughed quietly. Maya felt the words hit her like a sudden gust of cold wind, but she kept her posture straight. She shook her head politely. "No, sir," she said calmly. "I'm here for the junior pilot internship interview." For a brief moment, the room became awkwardly quiet again. The crew exchanged doubtful looks, as if they weren't sure whether she was joking or serious. One woman behind the desk scanned Maya from head to toe, clearly unimpressed. "To be a pilot?" she asked with a raised eyebrow. Maya nodded. To them, she looked too young, too inexperienced, and in their biased minds, someone like her simply didn't belong in a place filled with professional aviators and flight instructors. Most of the applicants they expected were older, usually college students or trainees, with years of background training. One of the instructors leaned back in his chair and crossed his arms. "Flying planes isn't a hobby," he said. "It's serious work." Maya tightened her grip on the folder, but she refused to let their reactions shake her confidence. What they didn't know was that Maya had spent years preparing for this exact moment. Her love for aviation had started when she was only 10 years old. While other kids spent their free time playing games or watching cartoons, Maya spent hours watching documentaries about aircraft, pilots, and airports around the world. She read aviation manuals that most adults struggled to understand. Her bedroom walls were covered with posters of airplanes and flight diagrams. By the time she turned 13, she had already learned the basics of navigation, aircraft controls, and flight safety procedures. At 14, she started practicing on advanced flight simulators, spending countless evenings learning how to take off, control turbulence, and land safely under different weather conditions. While her classmates talked about movies or social media, Maya talked about cockpit instruments, engine systems, and runway approaches. But standing in that office now, none of that seemed to matter to the people judging her. The whispers around the room grew louder. "Does she even know how complicated flying is?" Someone murmured. Another person quietly said, "This interview won't last long." Maya could feel their eyes on her, but she kept her chin up. Deep down, her heart was beating fast, yet her determination remained stronger than her fear. She had not spent years studying, practicing, and dreaming just to turn around and walk away now. No matter what they thought of her, Maya was determined to prove that she belonged there. Airplane. The interview panel barely tried to hide their skepticism. The long conference table felt cold and intimidating as Maya sat on one side, while 3 experienced instructors sat across from her, studying her application as if they were searching for a reason to dismiss it. Their expressions showed doubt before the interview had even properly begun. One crew member leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms confidently. His name tag read Instructor Miller. He looked at Maya with a serious expression and said, "Flying planes isn't a game. It takes skill, discipline, and years of training." His tone wasn't encouraging. It sounded more like a warning. Before Maya could respond, another instructor sitting beside him smirked slightly and added, "Maybe you should come back after college, or choose something more realistic." A few people sitting near the back of the room quietly chuckled. For a brief moment, Maya felt her confidence begin to crack. The words stung more than she expected. She had walked into the building believing this interview would finally give her a chance to prove herself. Instead, it felt like the decision had already been made before she even spoke. But she refused to show that the comments were affecting her. She took a slow breath and straightened her posture in the chair. "With respect," Maya said calmly, "I understand how serious aviation is." The panel members glanced at each other, clearly surprised that she was responding so confidently. Maya carefully opened her folder and began explaining her knowledge. She talked about aircraft systems and how engines maintain thrust during flight. She explained the importance of flight safety checks before takeoff. She even described how pilots monitor navigation instruments and weather patterns during long flights. Her voice remained steady as she spoke. "I've spent years studying aviation manuals," she continued. "I've practiced flight procedures on advanced simulators, including emergency landings and turbulence control." For a brief moment, one of the instructors raised his eyebrows, slightly impressed, but the others didn't seem convinced. Instead of asking deeper questions, the panel members exchanged quiet looks with each other. Those looks said everything Maya needed to know. They had already made their decision. Instructor Miller tapped his fingers lightly on the table, while another instructor flipped through Maya's application pages without much interest. It felt less like an interview and more like a formality they were rushing to finish. After a few seconds, the lead instructor, an older man sitting at the center of the table, slowly closed her application folder. The soft sound of the folder shutting felt louder than anything else in the room. He slid it gently across the table toward Maya. "We're sorry," he said in a cold, professional voice. "You're just not qualified for this program." For a moment, Maya didn't move. The words felt like a heavy door slamming shut on her dreams. Everything she had worked for, the long nights studying aviation books, the hours practicing on simulators, the excitement she felt walking into the building, suddenly seemed meaningless. Around the room, a few people quietly nodded, as if the decision was obvious and expected from the beginning. One instructor shrugged slightly, while another began organizing the papers on the table, already moving on as if the interview was over. Maya slowly looked down at the application folder in front of her. Her hands tightened slightly as she picked it up. Inside, her heart felt heavy with disappointment. But even in that painful moment, one thought kept repeating in her mind. This couldn't be the end of her dream. Not after everything she had sacrificed to get this far. Airplane. Just as Maya turned toward the door, trying to hold back the tears building in her eyes, the sound of firm footsteps echoed through the quiet hallway outside the interview room. The noise grew closer, each step clear against the polished floor. For a moment, no one inside the room paid much attention. The instructors were already moving on, gathering papers and preparing for the next interview. Then the main office door slowly opened. A tall man in a perfectly tailored dark suit stepped inside. His presence was calm but commanding. The moment he entered, the atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. Conversation stopped. Chairs straightened. A few staff members quickly adjusted their posture, as if they had suddenly realized someone very important had arrived. The instructors, who had been relaxed only seconds earlier, now looked alert and slightly nervous. Everyone in the room recognized him immediately. It was Daniel Carter, the billionaire entrepreneur and aviation investor who had recently funded the entire Harbor Aviation Training Center. His company's investment had built new training simulators, expanded the flight program, and turned the center into one of the most respected aviation training facilities in the region. Simply put, this place existed largely because of him. The instructors quickly stood up from their seats. "Mr. Carter," one of them said politely, trying to sound composed, "we didn't expect you today." Daniel Carter nodded calmly as he stepped further into the room. His presence carried quiet authority, the kind that didn't need loud words to command attention. His sharp eyes briefly scanned the room, noticing the panel of instructors, the tense atmosphere, and Maya standing near the door with her folder in hand. He sensed immediately that something had just happened. Maya looked surprised when she saw him. Her eyes widened slightly. "Dad," she said quietly. The single word seemed to freeze the entire room. The instructors stared at her in shock. For a few seconds, no one moved. The confident expressions that had filled the room earlier suddenly vanished. The smirks were gone. The quiet judgment was replaced with stunned silence. They hadn't realized that the quiet teenager they had just dismissed was the daughter of the very man who owned a majority share of the facility. Instructor Miller slowly blinked, clearly struggling to process what he had just heard. Another staff member looked down at the table, suddenly avoiding eye contact. Daniel Carter looked toward Maya, his expression calm but slightly curious. He could see the emotion she was trying hard to hide, and he noticed the closed application folder in her hands. Then his gaze shifted toward the interview panel. The tension in the room was impossible to ignore. He walked slowly toward the table, his polished shoes making soft sounds against the floor. No one dared interrupt him. "I arrived early," Daniel said in a steady, calm voice. The instructors listened carefully, unsure what he would say next. "I thought I'd watch the interview process today," he continued. His tone wasn't angry, but there was a quiet seriousness behind his words. His eyes moved from Maya to the panel of instructors sitting across the table. The silence in the room grew heavier with every second. He could clearly see that the interview had not gone well. Daniel Carter placed one hand gently on the back of a nearby chair and looked around the room once more, carefully reading the expressions on everyone's faces. Something had happened here, and he was about to find out exactly what it was. Daniel slowly walked toward the table, the quiet sound of his footsteps filling the tense room. Every instructor watched him carefully, unsure of what he would say or do next. Without rushing, he reached the table and gently picked up Maya's application folder. He opened it and began flipping through the pages one by one. The room became so quiet that the soft rustling of paper sounded unusually loud. The instructors who had dismissed Maya only minutes earlier now looked far less confident. Some shifted in their chairs, while others kept their eyes fixed on the table. Daniel read carefully, his expression calm and focused. After a moment, he paused on one of the pages and raised his eyebrows slightly. "Interesting," he said. His voice wasn't loud, but it carried enough weight to make everyone listen closely. "Perfect scores on aviation theory tests," he continued, glancing down at the document. "Advanced flight simulator certifications, and a recommendation from a licensed flight instructor." He turned another page, clearly taking his time. The room grew uncomfortably quiet. A few crew members exchanged nervous glances with each other. Only minutes ago, they had been completely certain about their decision. Now, standing in front of the man who had funded the entire training center, that confidence had started to fade. Daniel slowly closed the folder halfway and looked up at the panel. "You said she wasn't qualified?" he asked, raising one eyebrow. The simple question made the tension in the room even heavier. The lead instructor cleared his throat, clearly uncomfortable. "Well, Mr. Carter," he began nervously, "we just felt that." But the sentence never finished. He struggled to find the right words, and the silence that followed made it obvious that he didn't have a convincing explanation. Daniel didn't interrupt him. Instead, he calmly placed the folder back on the table and turned his attention toward Maya. His expression softened slightly. "Tell me something," he said. Maya looked at him, surprised but attentive. "Why do you want to fly?" The question hung in the air for a moment. This time, the room wasn't filled with whispers or judgment. Everyone was simply waiting for her answer. Maya took a slow, steady breath. She wasn't nervous anymore. In fact, she felt strangely calm. She looked at the instructors, then back at her father, and answered honestly. "Because flying isn't just about machines," she said. Her voice was steady and sincere. "It's about responsibility. When a pilot is in the air, people trust them with their lives. It takes courage to stay calm in difficult situations." The instructors listened quietly. Maya continued, "And it's also about perspective. When you're above the clouds, You see the world differently. Borders disappear. Problems feel smaller. You realize how big the world is and how much there is to explore. For a moment, no one spoke. Daniel looked at her carefully, and a small smile appeared on his face. It wasn't the smile of a proud father showing favoritism. It was the smile of someone who recognized passion and determination. He nodded slightly. Then he turned back toward the interview panel. "You see," Daniel said calmly, placing one hand on the table. "This training center was built to give talented young people opportunities." His voice remained steady, but the message was clear: not to judge them based on assumptions. The instructor sat silently, absorbing his words. For the first time that day, the room felt different. The judgment was gone, and in its place was a lesson that no one there would forget anytime soon. Airplane. The room stayed silent for several long seconds. No one moved, and no one dared to interrupt the heavy tension hanging in the air. The instructors who had spoken so confidently earlier now sat quietly, their expressions filled with discomfort. Finally, Daniel closed Maya's application folder slowly and placed it back on the table. The soft sound of the folder touching the surface seemed to echo through the room. He looked around at the interview panel, his expression calm but serious. "If this team cannot recognize talent when it's standing right in front of them," he said firmly, "then perhaps this team needs training too." His words weren't loud, but they carried a powerful message. The crew members immediately looked embarrassed. The confidence they had shown earlier was gone. One instructor lowered his head slightly, while another adjusted his papers just to avoid making eye contact. They knew that Daniel wasn't simply criticizing them. He was reminding them of the responsibility they had as mentors and instructors. This training center was meant to discover potential, not dismiss it because of quick judgments. Daniel then turned toward Maya. Her shoulders were still tense from everything that had happened, but when he gently placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder, she felt a sense of calm returning. "My daughter doesn't need special treatment," Daniel continued, looking back at the panel. "She only deserves the same fair chance as everyone else." His tone made it clear that this wasn't about favoritism. He wasn't asking them to accept Maya because she was his daughter. He was asking them to look at her qualifications honestly, the same way they should evaluate every applicant who walked through the door. The instructor slowly nodded. This time, they reopened the application folder and began reviewing it more carefully. Instead of glancing through the pages quickly, they actually studied the details: her perfect theory scores, her advanced simulator certifications, and the strong recommendation written by a licensed flight instructor who had trained many successful pilots. As they looked through the documents, it became clear that Maya's preparation and dedication were far beyond what they had first assumed. The lead instructor finally cleared his throat. "Miss Maya," he said respectfully, "we'd like to reconsider your application." Maya felt a small spark of hope return. The rest of the day involved additional discussions, a few technical questions, and a short simulator evaluation. This time, the instructors paid close attention to her answers and her skills. And by the end of the day, the decision was clear. Maya was officially accepted into the junior pilot training program. For Maya, it felt like the moment her dream had finally taken its first real step. But the story didn't end there. Over the following weeks, Maya worked harder than ever. She arrived early for training sessions, studied every flight manual she could find, and practiced for hours in the simulators. The same instructors who once doubted her began to notice something remarkable about her determination. Then one morning came the moment she had been waiting for, her first real training flight. As the small training aircraft lifted off the runway and climbed smoothly into the sky, Maya felt a wave of excitement and pride. Everything she had studied and practiced suddenly came to life. From above the clouds, the world looked peaceful and endless. And when she safely landed the aircraft later that day, the instructors watching from the ground nodded with approval. Maya had proven something important, not just to them, but to herself, that determination, passion, and hard work matter far more than anyone's assumptions. And for the crew at Harbor Aviation, that day became a lesson they would never forget, because sometimes the person you underestimate is the one destined to rise the highest. Airplane. If you enjoyed this powerful story and believe people should never be judged by assumptions, Make sure to like this video thumbs up and subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories like this. Don't forget to turn on the notification bell so you never miss our next story. And tell us in the comments, what would you have done if you were in Maya's place? Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next video. Clapperboard.